A solid low end is what separates pro mixes from amateur ones.
In this video, we're breaking down the 4 techniques we use to go from muddy to punchy and how you can do the same.
Hey there, Claudia and JVP here. Welcome to Mixing Breakdown Room. Today, this video is all about the low end. Tip number 1 is deciding your low end priority. What I mean by low end priority is within the low end, you still need to separate, for me, it's sub and lows, because there will be instruments that share all of these frequencies, and if you don't separate and manage them, for example, kick and bass, you end up with a very muddy mix. Yeah, how do you decide actually?
We can start from like easiest scenario to like hardest scenario. So the easy scenario is if the sound choice is already chosen that for you. So imagine a rock bass, maybe it lives around 100 hertz and there's like a kick at like 60 hertz. The sound choice already helped them separate in the low end. Or there's like an 808 that's like
no
need for sound examples. So that might live more in like the sub, and then you have more like a more clicky kick that's at 100. That's simple because of the sound choice decided the separation for you.
Yeah.
The more tricky case is when both low-end elements share the same regions. That requires a bit more manipulation. How would you do that?
Usually is, like for example, if the bass is not low enough but the producer or the reference shows that like the bass is very like subby, using some sort of saturation plugin to generate some sort of sub. And then for the kick, I would secretly trigger.
That's another way to do it.
Yeah.
Trigger another sample.
Just don't tell them. Yeah, so I guess it's really defining the kick and bass relationship. It's really about that.
If you have too much overlap in the low-end elements, they start to fight each other, and it actually sounds less punchy than when they are separated really nicely. That being said, separating them doesn't mean cutting all of the lows from one of them. They will both have lows. It's just finding little pockets for them to live in and stay out of each other's way. So tip number 2 is to manage the low end of other instruments that are not the kick and the bass. So this could be noise in the recording, or an instrument has frequencies that are clashing with the kick and the bass. No matter how well you've mixed your kick and the bass, you won't have a punchy low end. Most of the time, this just means low cutting that information out of, say, a piano, a vocal, or a guitar, that kind of thing, to let the kick and the bass shine in the low end region. Things that are maybe more pop EDM, you want a really clean low end and it doesn't sound weird. But there are some genres that they want the glue sound. You don't want it where it's like kick and bass and then like everything else. You kind of want it to like nicely blend into each other. And so that's where low shells are really helpful. Because sometimes you just want to cut away what is not useful, but you still want it to have some low mids, just less. Another way to control it is with multi-band compression or dynamic EQ. So imagine you have a song that has really big bass, but you also have a vocal, and the vocal is normally the star of the show, right? So if you make it really thin, the singer will be like,
why do I sound like a chipmunk?
One way to do it is to have low end in the vocal, but to make sure it never overpowers the bass. So instead of cutting everything, you just multi-band compress it so that, or dynamic EQ, so that when the vocal low end gets too much, it controls it. So it's still there, it just never gets overpowering. Quick thing before we continue. Grab our free compression and EQ cheat sheet in the description below. Compression and EQ make up 80% of a mix. So if you nail those fundamentals, you're already most of the way there. Now back to the video. So tip number 3 is to treat the low frequencies and the mids and the highs separately in your low-end instruments. This is a very important tip. So imagine you have a bass. A lot of times, if you try to balance a raw bass, you'll have 2 problems. Either you try to balance the bass according to the right amount of low frequencies, and so the bass doesn't cut through the mix, and it never shows up on, especially on small speakers. Or you try to balance the bass so that it cuts through the mix, and then your low end is massive, and it's just masking the whole mix. It's muddy, you run out of headroom, your mix is never loud. like all the problems stem from there. So this point is super important to avoid that. Different people have different ways of doing this concept. But the way I do it is for bass, a lot of times it doesn't have enough high end to cut through the mix. So if the bass has high frequencies in the recording, you can just boost it. But if the bass is not recorded with a lot of high frequencies, you have to kind of help generate some. That's where saturation comes in. Normally, I'll create an aux and put the saturation on the aux and send the bass there, put a distortion on that aux so that I can create some harmonics to help the bass have some high end. So after creating those harmonics, you can boost them with an EQ to bring them up. The other thing I find with bass is not only does it not have enough high end a lot of times, it's the low end needs to be controlled. So normally what I do is I'll send the bass and the bass distortion to a bass aux where they meet. Often I'll multi-band compression there. So like I'll take care of the sub separately and like the low separately. And that's how I get the controlled lows but enough highs to cut through the mix. How do you do it?
This is exactly our mix battle difference with our bass as well. So what I did is I would duplicate the bass exactly the same track. One of them I called it bass low. Another one I called it bass high. Bass low, I would cut all the way to a desired frequency, usually just between 80 to 120. But let's say 100. And then bass high is the other way. So low cut all the way to 100. So that I'm actually separating the high frequency parts and the low frequency parts have different processing. So for the low, compress the shit out of it because I need a low end, like a really solid foundation. For the high, I loosen up the compressor so you can feel the bass more dynamic and it's nice. With the low end, very controlled. Both of them, like you send to the aux and pretty much the same thing, like multi-band and then compress a little bit more, kind of pack them together again. So the last tip number 4 is extra tools to manage the low end further. So for me, and it's the most favorite one because it's immediate effective, which is sidechaining. Yeah, sidechaining. Pretty much do it on every single mix that I've done. It depends on how much I sidechain the kick. Sidechaining the kick to the bass, it will help the low end. Like for example, if they both really share the sub lows, then just have it sidechain. Like whenever the kick hits, the bass just ducks a bit. Done.
This is also a really important point to bring out. The low end is meant to work together. It's not the bass is doing a bass thing, the kick is doing its kick thing. Sometimes what that means is the kick needs to provide the transient and the bass provide the sustain. And so the sidechain is perfect for that because
it's boom, boom. Other than that, there may be some instruments that will take up some of the low end as well. Piano is one of them because piano, the frequency range is really huge. And you don't want a thin toy piano sound, right? If it really needs that instant, that moment where the kick really needs to take up the low end for that punchier sound and also more headroom because you're not letting that much signal in that area build up. Yeah, it's just like that instance, like,
I'll sometimes also sidechain frequency-wise. So you can do this with like a dynamic EQ or a multiband or track spacer.
You taught me that, I remember.
So just like make a little pocket, make it dynamic, so when the kick hits, boom, boom, boom. So in this scenario, we need a big vocal, but we also need the bass to live where the bass lives. How do you help them get along with each other?
So we can also use sidechaining for this. So sidechain the vocal to just a certain range of frequency in the bass that masks the vocal the most. And it usually lands around 100 to 400 hertz. It's so useful. You just basically, whenever the vocal needs to come out and be big, you can just kind of push the bass away in that area and just let the vocal sing. Oh, and then the bass can come back afterwards.
Boom.
Last question. Have you ever received multiple basses? Songs?
Oh, yeah.
How do you deal with that? Because multiple basses
sounds like muddy nightmare. It goes back to the first point. prioritization. So which bass is gonna live where? So normally when a producer or whoever made the song, they choose to like layer basses, is normally because they want a different characteristic from the bass they're adding on top. So for example, they might have a bass that has a lot of sub, but they want to add a layer that has a lot of high end. So in that case, they've already answered that question of priority for you. So maybe that's cutting the sub out of one bass and letting it provide the high information, and maybe letting the other one live in the sub, define it that way. There are times where you need both basses to have lows, and that goes back to the techniques we've mentioned before of like side chaining. You have one song like this. Where do we go now? You have one bass track where it's like a sustained sub pad, and then you have another bass that goes wop, wop, wop on the offbeats. If you make that super thin, it'll be like whoop, whoop, whoop. It's like, you know, it's not cool at all. What I did was I cut the sub out of the wubs, so that the pad is still providing subs. The wubs live in 80-100, and then multi-band the sub pad to like make some space for the wubs to come.
That's smart. That's so smart.
So those are 4 ways we use every mix to go from a muddy low end to a solid, professional sounding low end. We do something similar and do something different, but the 4 concept remains the same.
So remember, first, decide your low end priority. When you have multiple instruments in the low end, remember to decide which one takes the sub and which one takes the low.
Then, number 2, manage the low end of other instruments. If they don't need to have low end information, cut any noise or cut any low end frequencies that are getting in the way of the kick and bass. And remember, sometimes you want lows just less, so a shelf is perfect for that. And number 3, remember to take care of the mid and high frequencies in your low end instruments. Don't just use the low end to get those instruments to stick out in the mix. You'll run into muddy problems that way.
And on top of all of those techniques, number 4 is, remember you can use side chaining to help you further manage your low end. So don't forget to grab your compression and EQ cheat sheet down in the description box below.
If you found this video helpful, remember to like it and share it with someone who has a muddy low end.
So remember to subscribe for more mixing content, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!